Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our WatchGuard webinar, A Day in the Life of a Remote Employee. My name is Christine Ramsdell, Marketing Specialist here at WatchGuard. I'm also joined by two presenters. First, we have Wayson Vannatta, CIO, also at WatchGuard, and Steve Helm, Product Marketing Manager, as well at WatchGuard. Now, before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The first housekeeping item is that the audio is streamed through your computer only, so there is no dial-in. Second, all the widgets on your menu are resizable and movable. Third, there is a Q&A box located on your widget menu, and all questions will be answered at the end, but at any time, please feel free to enter your questions into the box. There is a on-demand version, which is available as your same live link. And lastly, we do offer CPE credit for all our webinars. This webinar is for 30 minutes, which will be worth half a credit. Please check in with your certification body for more details. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Steve to start things off. Steve, go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Christine. So I just wanted to start out the presentation talking a little bit about why it is we're here, what we're going to talk about throughout the presentation. And so first and foremost, we're going to just talk about how workplace flexibility is no longer rare. It's becoming the norm. So the idea that all of your employees are going to be in your traditional office environment is no longer the case. We're going to talk about some of the facts and figures around that. We're also seeing that allowing remote workers offers significant business benefits to organizations. And this is one of the reasons that more and more businesses are looking for security that can support these initiatives. And we're going to also dig a little bit into the security challenges that make IT very wary of allowing some of their employees to move off-site and talk about some of the different areas where this would be more or less concern. And finally, we'll wrap it up with a simple discussion on what we call user-focused security and how this can enable employees to roam free while not compromising your organization's security. So with that, let's go ahead and dig right in. So it goes without saying that today our work locations are dramatically different than they've been in the past. In the past, you would work from a traditional office environment. You'd be assigned a laptop or a desktop, something like that, where you'd be sort of chained to a specific area or a specific location where you do your predominance of work. And today, that's no longer the case. People are more free to work from their home office, work on the go from a vehicle, work in a coffee shop or library or a hotel when they're traveling for work or potentially out on vacation, something like that. Or maybe they're even engaging on customer sites. Regardless of where they're working, the real point is that it's changing the dynamic of how they access your computing resources and how you need to apply security to these audiences. And so we're going to go throughout this presentation and talk about some of the dynamics that are in play from a security perspective, as well as some of the best practices that we can use to help ensure that these employees are kept safe. And so it might surprise you today that nearly 4 million U.S. citizens work remotely, at least half of the work week. And that's a substantial figure in my mind. It was a bit surprising to me as I started researching this specific topic, how many people actually do work remotely. And in fact, by 2025, some estimates say that this will actually rival the fixed office location workforce. So, Wayson, I'm very interested to get what your thoughts are on this dynamic, and if this figure was as surprising to you as it was for me.
Yeah, a little surprising as well for me, and I guess for me, when I kind of look at it over my career, you know, we've seen the work hours in my early part of my career, you know, some 20 years ago. People tended to be wanted to be seen, wanted to be in the office, kind of working long hours. But as the advances in mobility and devices have come along, people were able to take advantage and work from home, and so certainly the dynamic has changed. And for someone like myself, responsible for IT, that certainly has changed the game for us as well. And so, yeah, I'm not a little surprised, but I guess when you sit back and think about it, I can see this outlook being very possible in the near future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's certainly a trend I think is going to continue to grow, and that's absolutely what our research has shown. I'll talk a little bit about that here in the next slide. And so one of the things that we did here at WatchGuard when we started to understand just the scope of remote work and this desire for workplace flexibility is try and understand for mid-market organizations specifically what was going on in their business. Were they adopting this workplace flexibility to the same degree as a larger enterprise, or were they a little bit more hesitant to do so? And so we engaged with a company called Site Research to do a survey of off-network use cases for the mid-market specifically. And so this really surveyed IT administrators from global organizations and started to ask them very specific questions about their workplace flexibility and how that impacted security. And so we found that 92% of organizations today allow some form of remote work, and this is again, it's a surprising stat for me. I would have thought it would have been less than that, specifically for the mid-market organizations and potentially higher in the enterprise. But again, a large percentage, the majority of organizations today, allowing remote work. And just as we said in the previous stat on the previous slide, the average employee is working more than 2 times a week from their remote location, wherever that is. And in fact, 80% of the organizations that we surveyed through this process expect their remote workforce to grow dramatically in the next 3 years. And so very interesting to see that mid-market organizations are very much looking at this from a strategic perspective. We'll talk about why that's the case in the next few slides. But very interested in Wayson, your thoughts on these stats. Is this something that surprised you from a mid-market perspective in your experience?
Yeah, a little higher than I thought, the 92%. But WatchGuard, we certainly support remote workers as well, and it's not uncommon for us to see that. I'd say the 2 times per week, that was a little higher than I thought too as well. I can say for WatchGuard, about 20%, between 20 and 22% of our workforce are working remotely and actually not tied to an actual office. So that dynamic's a little different. And so for us, some good examples of that is we have certain specialists in certain career fields around network security that provide a lot of different support throughout our different organizations. And so some of them we acquired through acquisitions, or we acquired the talent with the knowledge that they would be working remotely, but that they could be mobile enough to get to other locations to the teams that they support. And in terms of it actually growing, I'd also say that look at a major city like Seattle, where WatchGuard is headquartered. Office space is expensive. Commuting time continues to increase, and so really offering that benefit and folks being remote would definitely help just the work-life balance for people. And so, yeah, I can definitely see this definitely growing over the next couple of years. Absolutely.
Yeah, Wayson, you hit on a couple of points there that I think is really important in this conversation, and that's really that workplace flexibility and allowing this remote work capability can be a win-win for organizations. You mentioned eliminating a commute, and what can that do for employees from a time perspective, a stress and money perspective, if they're not having to throw as much money in their vehicles or train tickets, whatever it is, to get to their workplace, and they can get right into work simply from their machine wherever they are. And then on the other side, the organization saving rent costs, equipment costs, potentially meals and other utility costs, like just the power of building with all of those employees, for example. And at the same time, we've actually seen some research that indicates that working from home can actually lead to more productive behavior out of your employees. A Stanford study found that an average around 13% more productivity for those employees who were able to work from home. And I think that's it's a very significant improvement in productivity, especially when you consider it in light of some of the other benefits provided above. And so another thing we could talk about too is the ability to recruit and retain the best talent. And Wayson, you touched on this a little bit as well, whether or not that's through acquisitions or whether it's simply going out and sourcing the expertise that you need for your specific areas of your business. Being able to do that, being able to go out and source those employees and do that confidently no matter their physical location can be a major, I think, benefit to the organization. So Wayson, I guess I'm kind of interested in it. Do you see these benefits being applied a bit as pressure on you from an IT perspective to be able to support these type of initiatives and use cases?
Yeah, definitely the pressure does certainly start to mount there. But on a lot of cases, it makes a lot of sense. We have a sales force of folks that sell our products, so that naturally makes them much more on the road, and they need to be in front of customers. But we see from developers, tech writers, even tech support at times needing the ability and flexibility to work remotely or outside of the office. But with today's collaboration tools and video capabilities, and there's some other things too that we look at, it certainly makes it a lot more easier for them, but does put some pressure on IT in terms of, okay, so how do you start protecting these employees, and what do you start doing around that? And so, definitely not short on challenges when you start getting more of your workforce mobile like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just to hammer home this one final point on flexibility and how it can be important from a competitive standpoint for recruiting employees. 63% of employees today say that they don't need to be sitting at their desk in an office to get their work done. I don't think that's surprising for most of us, but 45% even take that further and say that it's one of the key motivating factors when considering a job change. And so, really, we're trying to paint the picture here that remote work and your ability to support and securely support remote work can be very important strategically for your business as you're trying to grow, source the best talent, reduce costs, and those type of things. Unfortunately, that really leads us into our next part of the conversation, and that's what happens from a security perspective and some of the things you need to consider from a security perspective to do this in a way that protects your employees and your business. And so what we did as part of our research study with Site Research is ask these IT administrators at mid-market organizations their understanding of their security posture for off-network security use cases. And so 90% of organizations said we're already using something like endpoint security to make sure that our employees' laptops are protected from malware. Now, this is a broad definition of endpoint security. It's suffice it to say this is probably antivirus type of solutions, be it a Windows Defender or something like that. 88% also said that they were very confident that their remote employees are using VPN. Now, this is a bit surprising for me because research has shown that VPN use is not always consistent with the availability of things like cloud applications, that employees are increasingly skipping to VPN altogether. 85% of organizations also believe that their employees are well trained enough to spot things like phishing attacks and identity-based attacks for remote employees. And this, again, is very surprising given the proliferation of cyber attacks that we've seen, starting with a phish and really compromising naive employees. And so those were sort of some interesting results for the survey, but they're sort of buttressed by the negative things we saw in the same responses. 91% of organizations said that they're concerned that an endpoint could introduce an infection on their network. And so this is interesting that 90% are saying they have some type of endpoint protections, but 91% are saying we're still pretty confident that that could be used and exploited to introduce an infection on our network, what we would consider the patient zero concept, where an endpoint off network becomes infected and introduces that into the core network when it reconnects. 89% are also worried that remote employees' devices could be accessed by unauthorized parties. So if the device is stolen or misplaced in some way, that could be accessed because they're not confident in the ability to keep unauthorized users out. And actually 64% of these organizations, despite their confidence in their security approaches today, admit that they've had a remote worker become victim of a cyber attack. And so there's a major security impact that could result in remote workers that needs to be considered. I'm very interested in your thoughts on these things, Wayson.
Yeah, I'm not surprised with the 90% having a solution. I'd actually, as someone who thinks security is important to our day-to-day in what we do, I'd actually would hope that would be higher. But 90 is certainly a good number. 88, around the VPN. A little surprised with that, and the 85% being well trained. I thought that was a little higher, and there's other dynamics there to consider. But for what the 91% tells me of those respondents is that they're certainly worried about that, and they know that that you have the human factor there. Is when you start talking offline and taking that endpoint out of your network, you start having to worry about that. So I can see where that's still of a concern, and you hope you're having tools to help protect you and help you off network as well, which I'm not sure if a lot of folks look at it that way. And so I can see where people are very IT professionals being concerned about that. As far as the 64% claim remote workers have been the victim of a cyber attack, that's fairly high. I'd be curious to see on what levels that is, and quite concerning, especially if you think you are protected at the endpoint. And so really what this starts talking about is it's really examining and knowing what kind of endpoint protection you have and what kind of tools you have out there. And so and this starts really talking about, hey, that remote working, while it's great for your company in terms of being a little more agile and a little more flexible and offering good benefits, from an IT standpoint, there's certainly things to worry about, and tool selection and protection is very important here.
Yeah, for sure. Also very important to understand that our employees are themselves a major attack vector today. They're increasingly being targeted as individuals for cyber attacks. 90% of malicious URL messages lead to credential phishing. So you're seeing instances where initial attack points are trying to scrape and get to your users' credentials, their passwords, so they can escalate their attacks. 99% of email-based financial fraud relies on human clicks. So again, there's a major desire from our adversaries to reach out and attack your users specifically as an entry point into your organization. And so these same attackers understand that your employees, as they leave your core security protections that you have with your network firewall, for example, are even more vulnerable to attacks because, A, they don't have those protections inspecting traffic. They also don't have some of the availability of the right-at-hand communication with their employees to identify things like phishing attacks and share that information with people across the office. They're sort of out there in isolation in many instances, perhaps in distracted environments, again, without some of those core security protections, and therefore are much more vulnerable. And so it should be really no surprise that 90% of all attacks start with a phish, and these are attacks that specifically target your users and try and get them to click a link or download a file that really starts and perpetrates these attacks. And so we really see three variants of that at a high level. Our happy clickers, who are simply folks who are sort of receiving large spray email type of phishing campaigns, almost like spam campaigns, and clicking those links without giving it much thought. And then you also see much more targeted attacks, spear phishing and CEO type of fraud, where individuals, be they executives or key members of your team, specifically being targeted. And I'll give an example of that in the next couple of slides, but being targeted because they can help you get to, as an attacker, where you're trying to get to, whether or not that's specific data or a specific part within a network to perpetrate your attack. And so, Wayson, I'm interested from a WatchGuard perspective how you view these type of attacks and what the real threat is for an organization on a day-to-day.
Yeah, we definitely see these, and you kind of touched on it, in terms of our CFO, our controller, and our payroll personnel. They certainly see a lot of this, because that is the quickest path to any kind of potential financial gain by a bad actor. And so, yeah, it is something that we try to educate users on and try to stay ahead of it in terms of showing people the realities behind this. And there's clever ways that bad actors are doing that now, and so it's a constant game of just ensuring and educating folks on that. And so I can definitely believe the number, and that is really, it's something that's been certainly creeping up higher and higher every year.
Yes, for sure. It definitely is something we continue to see escalating. And so with that in mind, one of the things I really want to encourage you to do as an organization is, technology aside, is really understand from a cultural perspective how we can help foster culture that's open and helps people identify these attacks and keep your business safe while also educating your employees. And the thing that I would really start out with is start talking with your executives. I gave an example of a CEO who was impersonated there. You should go visit them, tell them stories just like that one, and say, hey, you know, this is what's the potential harm if somebody comes in and impersonates you. Reinforcing these type of stories makes it very real. I also like to say, keep an open door, right? You want to have a culture in which the CEO and everybody on the executive team is open to these type of reports if there's potential fraud occurring, and also have a culture in which these type of requests wouldn't be made by your executive team, right? Have that executive team make it very clear what their expectations will be for responses on those type of urgent requests. You want to have a culture that's, again, very open and not so, I would say, Machiavellian, where people feel the impulse to need to respond to hesitant requests or risky requests. And also try and focus your efforts, right? Focus your efforts on the employees or people that you can identify that are more likely to fall victim to these things, whether or not they're less skilled with technology or they're just more in the crosshairs of attackers. Really try and focus your efforts there. Wayson, what would you think from an organizational perspective? What type of recommendations did you give?
Yeah, I definitely like some of them you made already, and I think anything that you want to, within an organization, you want to have success around, getting executive support and starting with them certainly helps. I alluded to earlier about some tools, but really before that, it's just the security awareness. There's a lot of different best practices around it. I can tell you at WatchGuard, we do fake phishing campaigns. We meet with employees at onboarding to let them know right out of the gate that you may see some phishing items, and we provide them tools within our email, for example, that points out things that says, hey, a display name externally on an email address matches a display name internally. This might be fake. So we do get involved and collaborate with them. We have other things where we use collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams, for example, or others may use something like Slack, where you can have channels where anyone in the company, including your remote employees, can engage with you at IT and ask you questions about, hey, I'm starting to see things that might not look right, and we can help guide them through that. And so I think initially that security awareness and certainly working internally really, reinforces some of the things that you're pointing out here, and get your company, how I look at it, get your company off to a good start, and get your employees, whether you're remote or on-site, really engaged and aware of what's happening in the security environment.
Yeah, for sure. Great, good stuff. So at WatchGuard, we really advocate for security with a user focus. So what do I mean by user focus? So first of all, authenticating people. You need to be able to tell people are who they say they are before you allow them access to certain resources and things of that nature. So providing things like multi-factor authentication is very, very important when you're talking about user-focused security. Protecting people on the internet. So we've talked throughout this presentation a lot about phishing attacks and those type of things, and that's simply keeping users safe as they navigate the internet. So if they click a link that they shouldn't, if they try and navigate to a website that they shouldn't, or are being sent to malicious infrastructure that could do things like host malware or phishing attacks, that you have the ability to detect those type of things and block them to keep them safe while they're on the internet. And then finally, keeping their endpoints free of malware. So we talked a little about antivirus earlier in the presentation, but what we're really talking about here is providing the security tools they need to detect the really evasive, nasty malware and ransomware that we see out there every day. And so this is things like behavioral analysis, heuristic analysis, the ability to sandbox files directly from an endpoint in a very safe environment to see if those things are actually malware before they're introduced to the endpoint. And so, Wayson, interested in what you think about this user-focused security and how you would prioritize some of these things.
Yeah, Steve, definitely. I think when I look at them, first off, it's just they're very complementary to each other, and a lot of security professionals strive for a layered security approach, and with our remote employees scenario here, it's more than the employee includes the mobile devices, the cloud storage where they're storing things, and so you need to protect a lot of different things here, and so the complementary of these items starts kicking in, and so authentication in an auth point specifically here, it's a crown jewel. A lot of it's certainly protecting you from the users from authenticating in, and kind of password protection, and lessening the onus on the employee itself, and but it also protects you on network as well, or at the office, and so there's a lot of dual purpose here for that one. DNS Watch Go so provides you DNS layer protection, and what I like here is you don't know what a user's doing on their network or what they're potentially looking at, so any kind of phishing attempt or malware that may happen there, you're protected now off network and for that remote employee. And then TDR just kind of rounds it out for you from an endpoint protection standpoint. You touched on certainly the ransomware protection, which is one of the bigger things it's done for us, and so certainly like that. And you also touched on something that's important, is the sandboxing, and so that's basically taking in something like a zero-day threat, right? Something that hasn't been detected yet, taking that, pulling it off of the network, analyzing it, and doing an appropriate review of it offline, and that's what that sandboxing means. So together, all three, again, provide you that layer and that protection. So it's something I definitely like seeing here when I have a remote user, and for that matter, any user, but specifically for our session here today, it does protect you, those remote users.
Great. And so, WatchGuard, again, we can offer these type of services to you today. We do offer multi-factor authentication with our AuthPoint solution. Encourage you to go to our website. We have a lot of great demo materials where you can get in and see how the solution operates and play around with how you would configure it. We just released our DNS Watch Go solution. Again, that's on and off network protection for users. It looks for phishing links and connections to malicious infrastructure related to malware and those type of things, and blocks them. One of the great components here with DNS Watch Go is it has that instant education component, in that if somebody clicks a phishing link and we identify it as such, they'll be served up an immediate video that trains them on how to find those type of phishing emails and those type of links going forward. We think that instant education can be very, very effective and bolster a lot of your security awareness training initiatives. And then finally, our endpoint detection and response capabilities, the idea that you can use behavioral analysis and heuristics to identify malware and kill malware on endpoints right away. And so these solutions might be unfamiliar to you if you've known WatchGuard for a long time. Obviously, WatchGuard has been the network security business for a long time, providing our fireboxes with the total security suite. But these solutions are really designed to extend our security protections to users wherever they may be. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your time today, and we'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, so we're doing questions right now, so please, everyone, feel free to input your questions into the Q&A box there that you have. The first question we have here is, looks like for Steve. So how does this work with a user-owned computer or a company computer? How do we better protect them?
Yeah, so typically what we're providing here at WatchGuard is for company-managed endpoints. So if you're talking about DNS Watch Go and our endpoint protection capabilities, we're really talking about company-managed endpoints. There are some BYOD solutions that are available out there, but we're really talking about those endpoints that are containing the most sensitive information and give you complete access into your potential business environment, not so much the BYOD devices that you might be dealing with.
Perfect, Steve. Thank you. And then I have another question here. So can you use MFA on an employee-owned device?
Yeah, so that's a bit different, right? One of the nice things about what we provide with AuthPoint is it's an app that your employee can download to their smart device from any one of the app stores, and you would set up an account with them. And they could use their personal smart device, and not only can they do that, but they can actually extend that capability to some of their own personal accounts. So let's say they wanted to protect their Gmail or their Facebook account, which offer multi-factor authentication. You could actually bring those tokens into the AuthPoint app, and so they can use that ability to authenticate in both areas and really reinforce best practices when it comes to authentication.
Great, thank you, Steve. And I have another question here. So, the new licensing for passports is this included with the existing Total Security Suite? Is that going to change and become their own products outside of the Firebox services?
Yeah, so what you see with DNS Watch Go and AuthPoint, those are separate from what we're offering with the Total Security Suite today, and certainly Passport will be the case as well. It's a separate license than what you get in the Total Security Suite. You'll continue to get the endpoint value with your host sensor capabilities that we provide as part of TDR in the Total Security Suite, and we'll communicate more of how that actually moves going forward. But yes, you'll have two separate streams there, one for the user-focused security services, and then we'll have our network security services that you're familiar with today on the Total Security Suite.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And then I have another question here. Either Wayson or Steve can answer. But how do I get past complaints about VPN password changes? What is the best practice for password changes?
This is Wayson. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Well, that one's a little tough in that I would say to follow best practice guidelines. I think for us, we do NITS, the password guidelines, where recently there's been some changes around making that less difficult for employees, and it's something that I think within each company you need to tolerate and discuss internally on how you want to treat that. The guidelines today talk about just 8 characters, 64, and don't change them as much, but it needs to be coupled with MFA, and so that combination needs to happen. And so I'd be less worried about the password as long as you have the multi-factor attached to it.
Perfect. Thank you, Wayson. And I have another last question here. It looks like we're running over a little time, so we will follow up with everyone's questions via email. And the last question I have here is that, let's see here, is TDR active when not behind a WatchGuard Firebox?
Yes, absolutely. So the host sensor with TDR is active when you're not behind a Firebox. That's communicating with a cloud service. So that absolutely extends some of the security of your Firebox in that sense. It is not required to be behind the Firebox. Now, you wouldn't get the network correlations when you're not behind the Firebox, but other than that, yes, it would function outside of the perimeter. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Wayson and Steve, for all that great info you presented today. And once again, all unanswered questions will be answered through email. Thank you, everyone, for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.